Welcome to the Next Door Neuro podcast, where we explore how your brain fuels your life and how to better fuel your brain in the modern world. Welcome back to Next Door Neuro. So I've thought a lot lately about why it is that the things we turn to feel better in the short term often end up making us feel worse in the long term. For many of us, this is alcohol or social media, food, or something else entirely. Most of us have experienced this in some way, though. Something works at first, it takes the edge off, it helps us cope, but then over time, it stops working. And sometimes, or oftentimes, it leaves us feeling worse than when we started. So what is going on there? And that question really sits at the center of addiction. But really, it's more than that. It sits at the center of how our brain works more broadly. But before we jump in, if you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, hit the alert button. This is a no-cost way to support me and to support the channel. Thank you so much. Okay, so today I sit down with Judy Grisel. She is a neuroscientist who has spent decades studying addiction and someone who's actually lived through addiction herself. And what stands out to me about Judy isn't just her scientific expertise, although that is incredible in its own right. It's the combination of deep neuroscience with her lived experience. So she brings this level of clarity and a real level of honesty to the topic that I think is both rare and uniquely valuable. And so in this conversation, we get into things like why substances can feel like a solution at first, how the brain adapts in ways that trap us in these cycles, and why addiction and even our everyday habits are so much harder to break than most of us think. And truly, this conversation isn't just about addiction. It's about how the brain learns and how we cope in a modern world full of addictive stimuli. And so let's dive into this really interesting conversation. Dr. Judy Grisel, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Jamie. I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. So for everyone who's out there listening and knows a little bit about me, I used to be a professor and a teacher, and I, in many of my courses, taught the science of addiction, as well as some of the, not only the mechanisms, but some of the behavioral understanding using Dr. Grisel or Judy's book called Never Enough, which I'm sure we'll get into. It is a fantastic book, and I'll link it in the show notes here, but it goes into not only her personal story, but it goes into how certain drugs affect the brain, how our brain responds to those, and gives a really clear, deep understanding of not only what drugs do in the brain, but how we can think about really and empathize with everyone who's maybe struggling with some sort of addictive behavior, because it really humanizes and brings the empathic emotion into understanding addiction neuroscience. So Judy, it's my pleasure to have you here personally, and I think the listeners are going to get so much out of this.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks.
So I want to jump in straight to your story, because you've lived this story that most people only hear about or think about from a distance. And so I'd love for you to take us into that, how your relationship with addictive substances started, how you found your way out, and how you have ended up here as a professor and a nationally best-selling author.
Well, it's funny. I just realized when you asked that question that I have been researching drugs for 50 years. The first 10 or so were on the street, and the last almost 40 were have been as a scientist. But I grew up in New Jersey, suburban New Jersey. I had a family that looked just fine, and pretty average childhood. And like many young people, I like to try new things. I like to take risks. And one day on a whim, at a friend's house, drank at least a half a gallon of wine. I always got my share, so we split a gallon of wine. I'm sure I got more than my share. But anyway, and it really changed the trajectory of my whole life. I was 12. I thought that alcohol was the best thing I had ever imagined. And really, I was probably inherently kind of reckless enough and daring enough and stupid enough maybe that I was off to the races. And in 10 years, I went from being this kind of nice kid to getting kicked out of 3 schools, one 10th grade, and 2 colleges that my mother applied to for me. Um, I contracted hepatitis from sharing dirty needles.
Yeah.
I was homeless. I was, the biggest thing I think was that I was absolutely miserable. And I was at the point when I was 22 that I felt like I was 122. And I also felt like I didn't want to live. I mean, I didn't want to live. And I
Yeah.
really, but I also definitely didn't want to live without drugs. And I thought they were the solution to, so I was just compulsively taking as much as I could get of sort of everything. My very favorite drug was cannabis, and
Yeah.
as a friend told me later, you chain smoked, which you could do this was in the 80s.
Yeah.
So I ended up in a treatment center totally by accident. I thought in the 80s that a treatment center was going to be like a spa, and I thought, yeah, I'm tired of running from the cops. I need a pedicure. So I got to this place, and then it was obvious right away it was not going to be pedicures. It was a lot of therapy and nurses and straight talk, and of course I was coming out of my skin. And one of the things they said, so I had just turned 23. They said, "You're going to die if you keep using. You have a disease, and it's killing you." And the whole thing was sort of gibberish, and I didn't really want to live that much. But I think I just had this much curiosity. So I thought, well, don't tell me I can't use. I can fix it, right? If I have a disease, that's what diseases are for. People fix them all the time. I was like so arrogant. And really, people who are like me kind of understand this. I was also very determined.
Hmm.
And so I thought I had a back door, which there was always a back door, isn't there? I thought. So I said, don't tell me. And eventually, it took me 7 years to get my undergrad, 7 years to get my PhD, which I did at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
Yeah.
And then I did a postdoc. And the whole time, I had told myself, I'm going to stay clean long enough to fix my crazy brain, and then I'll be able to use. And it's just like, just this kind of hope that, please, I don't want to live without it, but I can see what you're saying eventually. So anyway, that's how I became a scientist. By the time I had a scheme, I was going to stay sober for 7 years. That's how long I thought it would take me to fix everything. And 7 years came. I was, up to my eyeballs in, mouse pharmacology and rat, study, trying to look at brains and understand genes and things. But my life is a million times better. I could look at myself in the mirror. I had some friends who actually liked me. I paid my bills. My teeth were clean. I had underwear. The whole thing was really like much improved. So
Yeah.
I stayed and have been doing behavioral neuroscience ever since to try to understand. Now I don't want to fix it so much, although I wouldn't turn it down, but I don't think it's really going to be possible. But I think I want to know what's different about the brains of people like me and you from people who maybe don't have a problem.
Absolutely. I mean, what a story. There's so much to dive into here. I guess the question that has lingered with me, especially even kind of you allude to this in the book, and I think talk about it a bit explicitly, is you talk about alcohol solving the problem you didn't realize you had. The feeling that, oh, I should have felt like this all along. What was this problem that alcohol was solving as a
Yeah.
young 12-year-old?
Well, 12-year-olds, so right around puberty, it's not unusual, I think, to be full of insecurity and doubt and anxiety. And I was very typical in that way, maybe a little more. My parents were also full of insecurity and doubt,
Hmm.
and grown-ups, and they kind of hid it well. But I was, my brain and body were waking up, and it looked like the world even then was a mess. And how do you navigate? How do you become an adult? How do I find myself? It's a really interesting biological thing. It's sort of like, until puberty, you know, people are pretty much just like sweet versions of their parents in a way.
Yeah.
And then they become some other thing. And I was becoming that other thing, which is, let's admit, it's hard to grow up. It's very hard, whether you're an, pre substance abuser or not. It's just, I think, hard for everybody. So, just going to the lunchroom was a little traumatic, because who's going to like me today? I don't really know what I was so worried about, but I do know that alcohol and other things made me feel like, who the hell cares anyway? I'm
Mm.
I'm I'm fine. You can
Yeah.
all just kiss off because I got this. And it was lovely. I mean, I really thought in a way it was like a shortcut to growing up. And growing up, it's tough. I mean, think about first dates. How do you, this is how in the now people do, their their first dates are on Pornhub or something. But
Right.
at the time, it was like trying to figure out how to hold someone's hand, how to say hello. I
Yeah.
mean, I just could be wasted, and then I didn't
It's,
really care.
yeah. Which is fundamentally not that different than how many adults approach alcohol, the social lubricant. And so it
Mhm.
feels like here you had a pretty normal childhood with the requisite and normal anxieties and worries and discomforts, and you happen to find the silver bullet solution, or so it seemed in the short term.
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
It really did. And really, there were different chemicals that were antidotes to everything. So
Yeah.
alcohol was a good antidote to anxiety. Weed was a great antidote to boredom, and I was bored out of my mind in suburban New
Mm.
Jersey, in this, um, there's lack of energy. There's antidotes for that. So you could find any number of things. And this whole idea of just take what I need to fix the way I feel seemed, ideal until what I was taking was not really working that well, and I felt like awful,
Yeah.
really.
And it led to, as you described here, but in even more raw detail in the first chapter of your book, it led you into really the pits of hell, in terms of how you were living and being estranged from your family, and really challenging moments in the book to read. I'm sure much less to disclose, about stealing money from people and justifying that and going through. I've been fascinated because it's so easy to say, and it's so true, that the raw, unfiltered way that you wrote in your book is inspiring and courageous. But that doesn't do it justice in my mind. What I'm actually really more interested in is what brought you to bringing your personal story in to a book about how drugs affect the brain and what addiction looks like.
Oh, Jamie, that is a great question. I think it's my recklessness a little bit.
Hmm.
So I wanted to take a sabbatical in Italy. My earlier sabbaticals, I'm a professor, so you get time off every once in a while to kind of regroup. And I was always regrouping in the basement of some biology building doing my rodent studies. And I thought, screw this, I want to go somewhere. So I had to have a rationale. So I said, I'm going to write a book. And I thought, it just popped into my head, I can explain psychopharmacology and experience, and this will be great. It was a lot easier to write about the psychopharmacology than the experience.
Hmm.
But because my book proposal to my editor was, both, she was like, well, you got to put some more in. And so I can remember at the end that first part was the last thing I wrote. And I would I was sitting on my couch, probably in my pajamas, with the deadline looming and trying to pull it out of myself.
Hmm.
And it was painful to write about. It was painful, I kind of can gloss over, like the story I just told is not pretty, but we skipped a lot of the really ugly bits. But you can only wave your hands so much in a chapter. So, and then I thought, well, geez, my editor has edited the shit out of everything, and so she'll probably fix this too. And I sent it off, and she didn't touch it. And I was like, what the heck? I was kind of mad. And then I, again, didn't think about it, was busy, and it takes forever. And then this is a true story, but literally about 5 or 6 weeks before the book came out, it occurred to me, oh my gosh, people don't know this stuff about me. They think I'm a kind of respectable, like my kids' friends' parents and
Yeah.
teachers. So I made my kids all read that. Oh yeah, yeah. At the last minute, but I thought probably no one's going to read the book anyway, so maybe it'll just blow over. And I got my sabbatical in Italy after all.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, Terry Gross on Fresh Air picked it up, and then she really gets the credit. But then it blew up a little bit, and yeah, I mean, I think even though I had done a lot of healing, the stigma runs deep, and it's in our bones. I think we really don't like to look at addiction.
Yeah.
It's so pathetic, isn't it? And so, I mean, it was too late to do anything about it then, but I really didn't think through it. This is
Yeah.
my strength and my weakness. I did not think through all the details. Yeah.
Oh, there's something so earnest about that approach that I don't know. I love that because I'm a speaker before a thinker sometimes, and I've struggled with that much of my life, but I've really finally started to embrace it as kind of an exuberance rather than a flaw. But I guess thinking back to, all right, so you had this moment where you had to share this with your kids. Then you're thinking about, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people. This isn't just me. This ripples out. This affects a lot of people. Looking at it then versus looking at it now. How do you look at that intro chapter where you go into this really challenging depth of detail about your history with drug abuse and your relationships? When you see it now, after this book has been national bestseller, it's been on the shelves for 7 years, and people like me, people that you're not, close with personally, we know all of these details about your life. Has your perspective changed? Would you share it again if you had to write the book again for the next sabbatical?
Well, you said I'm a speaker more than I think, or I speak before I think sometimes. And I feel like in general, we have so many thoughts. We, meaning, society,
Yeah.
and we're not getting very far. I think the truth telling is what's in short supply. And it's not really easy for me to say, but to answer your question, I don't think I would change it. I think I would be a little gentler with myself. But what has happened as a result of kind of laying things bare? And I must say, I have not read the book since it came out because I don't quite remember all the things in there. And I mean, I don't know if I want to be exposed. I did make my kids read a little bit, um, and they didn't really want to talk about it,
Hmm.
of course, for the same reason. But I just wanted them to know in case. And but what has really happened, and I'm sure anybody who's kind of been vulnerable knows this. Vulnerability is attractive. It brings people.
Mhm.
And the opportunities I've had to connect with other people, especially young people who are suffering in similar or the same ways that I have suffered, um, is is really what it's about, right? I don't think we don't really help each other with great ideas, but we help each other by empathy and connecting. And so, I am brave. It's one of the attributes that made me a fierce addict, I think. I was like, don't, I'm going to drive to, Dallas in the middle of the night, no problem, with 3.5 tires.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but, that kind of attitude of, I like that I can take risks, and
Yeah.
it's still hard to take risks, but the payoff is so much better than hiding. And now I think
Mm.
I'm much older, and I think, what are we saving it for? Like, you're going to say safe, and then you'll be dead. So you
Mhm.
might as well let it out and then be dead.
Yes. And I completely agree. The strength and vulnerability and impacting others much more through compassion and connection rather
Hmm.
than good ideas or performance or, any of those other things. We
Hmm.
have this need because of, we see that as socially acceptable, and we want to come off as the person everyone wants to be to some degree because we're such social creatures. But what's so easy to forget in this day and age of everything is performative, you can post everything, and some people do, is that the best way to connect with others and to be with others really is to show your vulnerability. And by being able to do that and not crumpling in front of others and not crumpling in front of yourself, that's the strength. I'm not perfect. I've had my issues and I'm okay with it. To me, is so much stronger than, oh, I've never had issues, I can handle anything that comes my way.
Yeah,
That's Rocky 7
no,
type of bravado that doesn't really help anybody.
absolutely. I could not agree with all of that more. Yeah.
So there's something that struck me about your story, and then I want to pivot into a little bit more about like what's going on in the brain with addiction and get into what you study. But I've thought a lot about this idea of, if I could go back, would I change it? Or was that a failure or a learning moment? Or I wish that didn't happen. Because we all have moments of regret, some
Hmm.
bigger than others.
Hmm.
But the view that I've really started to come to, especially as a neuroscientist with an understanding of the environmental effects on the brain and plasticity and all of this, is, without certain experiences, we couldn't have grown in the way we have. And so when you look back on, a decade or more of your life that is filled with quite a lot of regret and quite a lot of challenge, do you wish you could wipe the slate clean? Or do you see that as formative for who you are now, and in a weird way, maybe wouldn't trade it?
Hmm. There's a little tiny piece of me that thinks, yeah, I wish I would have, like, it's this big, you know, not gotten so close to wrecking so much.
Mhm.
But no, I would not change it because, like you, I believe that who I am today, and I like myself today, and other people like me okay too. Who I am today is a result, not so much of, what I was born with, but what my experiences have done with what I was born with. And yeah, and I feel like no, I wouldn't change it. Now as I say that, I recognize I've had a lot of privilege in a way, and I'm really fortunate because most of the people like me don't end up, with a nice professor office and getting interviewed. And you know, so there's a lot of things. I've been really, really gifted, but yeah, I think every single person has strengths and liabilities, and that those come from this, our mistakes as much as they come from our DNA, and that, we're the only ones we have. I have a friend, I love this. She says, um, "I've never been sober in this day before, and I'm still sober this many years later, and it's just like a way to give my little, you know, flawed self a kind of a break." And so there were times in my life, many, where I wished I could be more perfect. But when I'm really awake and paying attention, I think, no, it's the imperfections that are
Mm.
who I am. This is the juicy part of
Yeah.
Judy.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. And I think it also comes back to viewing yourself with compassion and the empathy that you'd give to others, and stopping and saying, okay, I haven't made all the quote right decisions or whatever it might be, but I'm better because of it. And there's this feeling that if I'm not better because of it, or if I can't learn from that and embrace that, then it was all for naught. Then those mistakes really truly were in vain. But if I made a mistake and I learned from it, that's called growth.
And the truth is, I make mistakes every day.
Right.
I made mistakes yesterday, that I was like, oh my gosh, how can I be such a nut,
Yeah.
And I think that it's tyranny to believe that my goal is to like sort of become mistake free, because it's impossible. At least for me, it's impossible. I think it's much better to fall down and get up, fall down and get up. So just getting up. There's a story about this person. The reason I say that is a monk, was asked, how do you reach, what do you do all day in the monastery, where you're trying to gain perfection? And that's what he said. We fall down, we get up. We fall down, we get up. And so it's really the getting up that I think people who go through some tough times are masters at getting up. And I think that is way more valuable than trying not to fall down, because good luck, if you don't fall down, someone's going to run over you with a truck and you'll fall down that way. So it's and being perfect, honestly, it's boring anyway. So it's just, yeah, we agree, I think.
Absolutely. And I think and I want to pivot a little bit into what you're doing now and thinking about addiction, and you as a behavioral neuroscientist in the field of addiction. And, so for those who aren't familiar, Judy is a professor at Bucknell, and does both teaching and research. And her research continues to be in the science, in the field of the science of addiction and behavioral neuroscience around addiction. I would love to hear, Judy, what is it like studying addiction from the perspective of someone who's been through it in a really prominent way? How does that change your approach to research or your approach to teaching students in the lab?
It's a bit of a superpower, honestly. I think people who struggle with something like bipolar or schizophrenia or early trauma, those are the people who have some insight. Honestly, sometimes I'm asked to review a paper and I think this is the stupidest thing. Why even ask this question? Hello. But, I try to say it in a nicer way. No.
Yeah.
Instead, I think there's a certain invaluable sense that comes from experience. And it's not all there is. I'm not as smart as most of my colleagues, but I do, I have a good nose, so I can tell what's useless, And look, all these really smart people, this is tragic. We have not solved anything. We have not. The chances of dying in a ditch from addiction today are higher than they were when I got sober and when I went to grad school. So all these brilliant scientists, all these great clinicians, all these good techniques, and people are falling like flies right under our noses, So that is not it. Now, the empathy may or may not help me, but what I've learned is that addiction is a formidable problem. It's a complex disease. Half of our risk is biological. We're pretty born with it, genes or epigenome changes. Half is environmental things, I think, all kinds of things, culture and stress. But our genes haven't changed in the last 50 years or so, 40 years since I've been sober, and our environments really have changed. And so the reason, even though I became a neuroscientist to fix my broken brain, being facetious there, the real, change has been that there's much better access to very high potency chemicals, and they are available to younger and younger people. Yeah. So we now know, for instance, that it could be a substance like cocaine or THC, in a very pure form, but it could also be pornography, it could be gambling, it could be social media. There's a lot of process addictions too. They're
Yeah.
all doing the same thing. And why we're in such a mess with substance and other addictive disorders is because young people have access to those levers to change the way they feel, the way that I really appreciated it
Hmm.
earlier and earlier, and the levers are stronger and stronger. We all basically have fentanyl in our pocket.
Mm.
So at 12 or 13, more or less, I mean, I'm maybe exaggerating a little bit, but you have an 8-year-old, you'll
Yeah.
see it's like this world is tough. and
Yeah.
and most 12, 13 year olds are looking for a way out, and their parents are not the source that they're going to get that from. So where do they get it? Well, they try something out of curiosity that for some of us it feels really, really good. Some people are less sort of primed to love, the biologically primed and socially and culturally primed to love it, but plenty of us do. And so, it's I think harder and harder not to become an abuser of these substances, especially because society is sort of telling you, like, you shouldn't feel bad. Get something to feel better. I mean, feel better. And then, look at your phone and we'll tell you how to feel better. And, this will make you rich quick and this will make you not anxious. And it's insanity, really. I mean, there is no shortcut. That's the brutal truth. There is no shortcut, especially since so the causes are genes, environment, and development. And the what happens is when the brain gets exposed to potent activities or substances that change the way you feel to make you feel better quick, and this is just terrible. The way the brain works is it adapts to make you not feel so good because it wants to maintain a kind of homeostasis. So it's kind of like what goes up must come down. You come up, you're going to come down. And there
Yeah.
is no free lunch in that. So you can't just get, so what people like me do is we try to get more and more and more. Okay, now if I
Hmm.
smoke and drink and snort a little of this, then, it'll be just right.
Hmm.
But the more I chase that, the more my brain adapts so that in the end, I'm creating exactly the state I'm trying to avoid. That's addiction.
Yes. So I would love to dive into this a little bit because I think a lot of people feel as though they get addiction. Someone can't stop. It's, whether you believe it's, and historically I'm sure there's a lot of willpower, like, oh, you should just be stronger. I think more and more people, especially those who are scientifically literate and seeing the literature and the development, understand it is a disease. It's a neurobiological disease disorder that has underpinnings that's just as real as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's would be. We just don't understand it yet. And so that's why it feels so, since we don't understand it, we like to blame the individual. But I'd love to dive in a little bit to what you're getting at with this idea of homeostasis, this idea of really high potency. So, and starting with like what makes something addictive. So thinking through like, why would I get addicted to heroin but not a great sunset? Why can I get addicted to, junk food but not my kale salad? What are some of these qualities that make something addictive, whether it is a drug or a behavior in life?
Hmm. I was just teaching this morning to a neuroscience class, but there's a simple answer to this question, which is rarely the case. There is a common pathway. This pathway is got dopamine, and it's called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. It's in the very center of the brain, and it's pretty scrawny. It's not a really, like there's way more serotonin neurons or even endorphin neurons. Cannabinoid signaling is like, way overshadows this. It's this puny little couple of tracks, basically, that release dopamine. But when dopamine is released in this mesolimbic pathway into an area called the nucleus accumbens, we feel value. We feel, wow, nice. Something tasty. And, it used to be called the pleasure pathway, which I think it's way understating it. Pleasure actually is not as great as the anticipation of pleasure, which is way better. Just think about that. So it's really that like peaking of, oh my goodness, what is this? It's like sexual foreplay, right? Not
Mm,
a climax. It's the leading up to it.
yeah.
It's the present on the table that's not opened. So when we have this sense, because certain things are really valuable, and in an evolutionary sort of normal setting that we evolved with, for thousands of years, those special tasty treats might be a little bit of a pot of honey or a honey pie, a human being who is a potential pot of honey, um, or basically that's it. I mean, the things that were fostering survival, which were sex and food, more or less, and then, a couple other things, water when you're thirsty, warm bed. Music can evoke this, but it's a feeling of curiosity and interest and anticipation and kind of hope.
Mm,
So this is awesome that we have this pathway. It's just that every addictive substance and process leverages that pathway to say, you can feel that great feeling of hope and excitement and promise and value sitting in your basement,
mm,
by yourself. And you can have it all you want. So here you go. So that's the dilemma. And the interesting thing, and I have to say this part, but the more we step on it with these unnatural things. These are available as much as we want, pretty much when we want, from the time we're 12 or 13.
yeah.
Um, the more we use those, the less sensitive this dopamine pathway is. And there's, hundreds of papers showing this kind of down regulation. And you can think of it like listening to music. I like the music. It's really good. So I'm going to turn up the volume a little bit because I like it so much. And the more I turn up the volume, the less well I'm able to hear. And pretty soon the sound is muffled because I've had the speakers cranked so high that now all the nuance is gone. I mean, I sometimes see people with big headphones. I'm like, turn it down because it doesn't get better,
Yeah.
it just gets muffled. And in a situation like that, and I was in this situation, so I can definitely say it, the only way I could feel any feeling of hope or excitement or promise was to be just loaded,
Yeah.
you know. But a day without a drug was like a day literally without sunshine, I mean, there was no, maybe not even oxygen, it was just bleak.
Yeah.
So that's the rub, that the brain adapts, counteracts it. And so we're creating here, I wanted to feel good and I'm creating feeling bad. So now the only way to feel even decent is to be loaded.
Yeah. And so we have this dopamine system in our brain that is meant to, reinforce the behaviors that lead to good things in our lives. So when you find a mate, okay, do whatever you did to get to this mate because that's a good thing, or this food store, or the food stash, things like that. And there's a fundamental difference between how the system evolved in a world of scarcity. Finding a
Mhm.
mate was rare. Finding really
Mhm.
highly palatable, highly caloric food was rare. And we've created an environment where all of these rarities are
Mhm.
now plenty everywhere,
Mhm.
overloaded. You can't get away from them if you want
Mhm.
to. And now with
Mhm.
phones, all these things like potential mates, are available in your pocket all the time. Where, for us growing up, talking to the cute girl was like maybe you did it once or twice that year. And you had to figure it out and like, okay, and I don't even know. And now you have this experience where it's much more intense daily. So now it's a different world. And so there's this
Totally different
evolutionary
world.
mismatch.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that point you were making, students, the biggest group of impotent people on the planet are young men.
Hmm.
And the average age they get on Pornhub or something is 12. So they have had all the so-called dates they could handle.
Yeah.
And then more and more, and as much as, they're insatiable.
Yeah.
Now we're going to have AI partners, so they won't ever say, I'm tired.
Yeah.
And so that kind of overdrive makes 20-year-olds unable
Yeah.
to respond to a normal stimulus. So that is absolutely the the pattern over and over again. We
Yeah.
want to feel good in the short term. We're ending up, feeling not as good.
Yeah. And that is, then you keep chasing the dragon, as the kind of the classic metaphor or whatnot. But this idea that your brain habituates, you keep chasing it, so you go more and more, your brain habituates more, so you need more, you go for it more, but you never get to where you're going because your brain has adapted. And then meanwhile, all the things that should be activating this system, holding hands with someone you love, a beautiful sunset, a really fresh apple or tomato or whatever it might be,
Hmm.
feel like nothing because the system has gotten habituated to being at level 11, 12, 15 all the time. And so you can't get back without this really painful period of abstinence and sobriety from whatever it is you're working at.
Exactly.
And most of us just have not gotten we're not willing or not able, depending on whether it's true addiction or not, to get away from that and have that pain, because I believe the science also shows that the period of abstinence required to kind of reset baseline correlates with how long you'd been using generally.
Yeah, it depends on the drug,
Yeah.
and the potency of the drug and how frequently you took it, but it also depends on how your age. So this
Mm.
is kind of, I didn't realize when I wrote the book. I'm working on a new book now, to more emphasize this, but it turns out that addiction is a form of learning. Your brain is learning to sort of turn down when you turn up. So you turn
Mm.
up, it turns down. You turn up, it turns down. You're in this race with the brain, and it's gonna win. But it's
Always does.
clever, yes.
Yeah.
So what happens is, it's a form of learning, and we all know this. Kids learn better than adults. Kids are sponges. They pick it up dang quick. So this is why this is such a vulnerable time for addiction. Well, there's several reasons. One, the dopamine pathway that we talked about, that is on absolutely peak performance in between puberty and, say, early 20s. It's so wide open. And you just said it. What dopamine is supposed to help us do is find the tasty treat. Well, when do you need to find that tasty treat? Not when you're 60, not when you're 40, not when you're 7, when it's your parents' job, but when you're
Mm.
trying to discover your own life and who you are and what you want. And so, is this tasty? Nah. Is this? Oh yeah. So for all of us, it's really tuned up at that time. So the drugs are going to be especially compelling, but also, they're going to learn it quickly. And so that adaptation that results in the downregulation we were just talking about is really profound. So I think one of the things that very much helped me and drives a lot of my work today is that I ended up in this not spa, when I was just 23. And I think the extra time before my brain was fully mature really, helped me unlearn some of that stuff. So we become addicted quicker, but we can also recover quicker and more profoundly. So this is really the sour spot and the sweet spot for, for intervention and for prevention, really. And I think recognizing that kids are kind of biologically primed to need something, meaningful, something valuable, means that we got to do a better job, society does, providing that kind of value that doesn't, kill them. So it can't be just on, websites or in little baggies. It has to be in
Yeah.
something maybe more, I don't know, wholesome. That sounds like I'm an old lady, and I am, but something less destructive, more creative. What could it
Yeah.
be? It could be, you know, creating anything, building anything, doing experiments, rock climbing,
Yeah.
um,
Learning an instrument,
yeah,
these kinds
learning
of,
an instrument, yeah,
yeah.
playing a
So
sport.
as a parent, this rings, I mean, my daughter's not quite there yet, but man, is it going by quickly. Um, Thinking through, are there preventative interventions, things like that? Is there any evidence out there that would suggest kids who have meaningful hobbies in middle school, going into high school, that time frame, or even going into college, tend to not show high levels of addiction or addictive behavior?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So, yes, in that, especially if those hobbies are communities,
Yeah.
So I think what adolescence we know about the adolescent brain is it's primed for value. It's primed for finding what it matters. And what matters most to it, if you think about this from developmental psychology, is other kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, the parents can only do so much with the cello lessons because it's likely that, oh, the cello was good, but no, not anymore. I don't want anything to do with the cello. I just want to, hang out at the, stoop with my friends.
Yeah.
So it would be helpful, and it is helpful, in the science when kids are on team sports or team, bands or debating clubs, or when they can interact with each other in a way that is challenging and novel, got to be novel. So it needs to be like flying lessons kind of stuff,
Yeah.
adrenaline producing because they're looking for that, but also sort of oriented toward kids. So I'm working on this new project where I have students, it could be high school, college, even grad students, working with other students to understand science, which for me has been very exciting. I mean, the science itself is almost as good as cocaine.
Yeah.
And, it's challenging, it's risky, you never know.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're unpacking science for other students, and they're being creative. They're designing social media posts, and so one of these is called True Weed. And I'm always
Mm.
looking for volunteers. But I have students in Korea and in Turkey and in Switzerland and Nigeria. So and in the States too. So I don't know. I think they have to find something that they're interested in.
Yeah.
Their parents really can't find it for them too much unless you're lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if your parents are, surfers or something and I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think it's hard. They want to go away from their parents.
It's just natural that way.
Hmm.
And it's so much more challenging. Like you were saying, addiction rates are increasing despite brilliant minds, tons of money. We've got a whole division of the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, the NIDA, the National Institutes for Drug Abuse. So tons of people dedicated, tons of funds dedicated to going to working against this, finding solutions, finding help, figuring out clinical interventions. And yet we're not making this progress because it feels as though we're competing with an environment that's becoming more and more addictive in general. And okay, we're now less able maybe to keep at least marijuana away from our kids because with legalization, it's easier for an 18 or 21-year-old or whomever to get this. That's easier to get it versus getting it when it's completely illegal. And now we've got highly addictive, or the evidence seems to be getting there, highly addictive objects, our phones, taped to us all the time. Literally, you feel naked when you forget your phone. People have anxiety attacks, things like that. To me, this conundrum is, how do you foster more of that meaningful but not quick hit experience?
Hmm.
How do we change our environment to go back to those huge hits are rare and you have to work towards things. Because to me, it feels like such an uphill battle to raise a kid,
Yeah.
because no matter how strong your family is about this, they're in a world in which all their friends are getting these things. The world is catered to it, highly palatable foods all over the place. So of course they're going to gravitate towards that, and they don't have the prefrontal development to understand why this might
Right.
not be good for them in the long run.
Yeah. It's a tough sell.
Yeah.
And it's getting tougher every day. I think, we should regulate uh, a little bit of constraint here. Children are children by
Yeah.
definition because they can't be responsible for themselves. So adults are dropping the ball. Like the fact
Mm.
that they have access to so much is like, hello, you guys, who's protecting us? So they can't protect themselves. They think they can. That's the difficult thing. So there's that. But I don't actually think we're going to be able to stop the supply. And I base this partly on my time, a long time ago. I mean, if there's a will, there's a way. You're bringing up, you think that people have a lack of will. Well, I definitely had a strong will, and I was going to get it, and I didn't mean I had to drive to Dallas on three wheels. I mean, I think our will is a good thing. I think one of the things that's lacking, and it's a lot, but one of the things is that people don't understand that the brain's going to adapt to create exactly the opposite state that you're taking the drug for. The more you take the drug, the more you experience the opposite. If you take it a little bit, you experience a little bit of the opposite. Take it a lot, you experience loads of it. And too much, and have an addiction. So my dream is that people understand that principle in like fourth grade, just like they understand, we need sunscreen or we need to wear our seatbelts. Oh, if I take this, I'll feel good in the short term, but I'm gonna have to pay that back. And I feel like that basic truth, which is, I think the first law of thermodynamics too. I mean, it's just this is how nature works.
Yeah.
There's a pendulum, it swings back. So
Hmm.
I want everybody. That's not a hard concept. Let's
No.
start there, and then my hope, I mean, because I'm an educator, is that we can let people have the information they need, provide them with the information they need to make the best decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
Legislation, I'm not too hopeful. I
Yeah.
don't think their parents are going to keep them safe in this
Mhm.
world. I'm sorry. I wish they could. I tried heroically, and my kids are okay. But I drug tested my kids through college. So I mean, I don't leave it to chance. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, to me, that is profound in terms of, I think it's easy to think about how do we change the environment. And, I said it 3 minutes ago, kind of prompting this whole thing is how can we change our environment so these things are rare? And I completely agree. I can't see a way, especially in, a capitalistic society in which we're going to stop and say, this isn't going to happen anymore. It doesn't feel realistic. And
Hmm.
so the education component, and I do think coming back to this idea of this is a safety concern, just like looking both ways before you cross the street or wearing your sunscreen, the idea of there's no free lunch and there are things that can make you feel better in the short term, but they can harm you in the long term.
Hmm.
And having that information, I think the challenge is it's a little bit more. Whenever there's distance between action and consequence, we really struggle,
Hmm.
right? And so here, you step out in the street, you get hit by a car, it's real obvious consequence. We can grab that, we can get it. But the idea of, oh, you're going to feel better for a while, but in 5 years you might struggle, and we struggle with this idea. But I think we've got to start there.
Well, one thing in our favor
Yeah.
is that kids, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, they all probably know somebody
Yeah.
who drinks a lot of alcohol, let's say, and doesn't look like they're having that much fun,
Hmm.
and or is vaping, and it's sort of a pathetic habit. I mean, it doesn't look cool. It looks like you're got a ball and chain, tied to
Hmm.
your hand.
Yeah.
So I think if they're young enough, they'll probably look around and think this does not seem great. Now, when they try it, which they will probably, they're going to realize, oh, now I understand. But if they could have the sort of pre-knowledge that, like you said, there's no free lunch. It's like taking money out of the bank. You can't just keep taking it out because there's nothing left. And then, then you feel like I did. So I think that, yeah, I'm hopeful about that because I think we have to trust people to be able to make the decisions that are best for them, and especially teenagers. Nobody's going to tell teenagers anything. I
Yeah.
mean, really, we'd be really silly if we thought if you haven't had enough of them yet. But I want to come back to this willpower thing because
Yeah.
I do think that it's not that it's certainly not that if the addict had more willpower, she would not be living under the bridge.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of willpower. And we have to use that too. And when I got sober, it was a little bit of willpower. I just used the, strong drive I had to do some different things. And I think
Mm.
finding substitutes, we're kind of talking around this, but,
Yeah.
you know, and this is true for me. I cannot say, don't do this. I'm one of these people, I always say this, but all I have to do if I want to gain weight is go on a diet. The minute I try not to, then I'm eating more. So I think we cannot take it away, but we have to say, look, you have this smorgasbord at your fingertips. There's a price to pay. Um, what would be also interesting? Would you like to learn, mandolin? Would you like to take some art lessons? Would you like to learn to mountain bike or whatever it is, debate? And but give them we're not going to trick them into getting sober, believe me, but we
Mm.
might be able to educate them
Mm.
into making better choices.
And I think we underestimate willpower as a skill. We think, oh, they have a lot of willpower, and there's this assumption that they were born with that it's hereditary, that it's genetic. But really, willpower in terms of executive control over emotions, behaviors, desires, this is a prefrontal cortical kind of control over your limbic system. If we're talking brain talk and all that, it's a skill that you can develop. And I think that's where, in my perspective, it also comes back to educating, giving
Mhm.
children, giving adults the information that they need to know to make an informed decision, but pairing that with the skill to suppress a desire that might have high consequences in the future for a small benefit now. And to me, I think a lot of us think, well, I'll just never have that much willpower. I just can't do that. And we don't realize that, okay, if you start small and you start finding ways to, withhold an impulse that's a minor impulse, you're starting to train your brain and it'll get easier. And then you move on to bigger things and bigger things and bigger things. And all of a sudden you're the type of person who can be, is a, say recovering alcoholic, and you can be in a bar because that's where your friends are hanging out without feeling like this is torture for you. But you don't get there overnight.
No, and if you can't do that, it's understandable. Like, think
Yeah.
about the smartphone addiction, right? So I have many students who want to not spend, 2 hours a day on TikTok, but it's really hard to resist. And
Yeah.
you know what the solution is? Delete the app.
Hmm.
So you don't have to rely on your willpower.
Yeah.
Take it like crap off your phone. Just, you can always put it back on. You
Yeah.
really can. And, and to recognize, I think another thing that we have, kids are kind of cynical naturally. And if they really knew how much money was being made on their, in sort of nurturing their addictions, the cannabis industry is big tobacco and big alcohol, now promising medicinal benefits. It's not like these are, friendly companies that are doing it to help you. They're basically trying to squeeze you to get profits. So we should all just think, is this really serving me?
Hmm.
And even though growing up is hard, and painful and lonely and frustrating and just all of that, there's no shortcut.
Yeah.
And I had to do it late, so I had, was out of step with my friends. There is no shortcut, and it's worth it, because then
Mm.
when you're older, then actually it's good again. So it's a tough time in life. We have a sort of a perfect storm here, and yeah, there's a lot that all of us can do to make it easier, so these people can have a full life.
So, as someone who's pulled some of the strongest levers for escape, for pleasure, with these artificially high, drugs of abuse and other substances, things like that. What do you do now to relax, to calm down after a big week, to jump into the weekend? And what have you found works really well, or perhaps even surprisingly well, if we're trying to think through, how do I do this if I don't have a drink? How do I do this if I don't have a smoke? What are the things that you found?
Such a good question. I do want to start with a little, in the beginning, it was brutal. I mean, I asked myself that question. I'm like, what am I going to do with my time? Um, and it was not easy. If I think the big uh, challenges were all like sort of basic growing up stuff that was no, and it wasn't fun. But now I have fun almost to anything. Now I have a lot of actual real fun. So I'm a big fan of live music, and I spend a lot of money traveling to see bands I like. I love traveling at all, and I do travel quite a bit. I love I mean, this sounds probably not appealing to young people, but really the most rich, interesting experiences I have are kind of inner experiences with in the quiet, either in
Mm.
nature or in just listening to stillness, which sounds probably, but it's to me the most rich, juicy, fascinating stimulus is not a bag of powder or, dab of oil. It's reality, and
Yeah.
reality is like full of surprises and um, bumps and shooting stars and little flowers and awkward moments. So I think it's certainly challenging. It's certainly unpredictable.
Yeah.
I mean, much less predictable than your TikTok account or your cocaine dealer, and yeah, and yeah, kind of infinite. So all the things I like to do are things that are not dead ends, and
Mm.
there's several. I think anything creative, writing, which I don't enjoy, but in a way, it's very um, compelling. So yeah, I think uh, yeah, rubbing my dog's tummy. I don't know,
Yeah.
talking to one of my kids.
It is. It's coming back to, well, first of all, I can't believe you don't enjoy writing, because your book is fantastically written. I've got to say, just the emotion, but also the scientific integrity there. So, um, but I think there's a lot of emerging science around awe, these feelings of awe with the
Mhm.
world. And like you're saying, the things that are most reinforcing are those that are the most variable, that kind of classic gambling variable reinforcement schedule to get people addicted. When you've got that variability in the world and you actually see it. I saw a shooting star a couple weeks ago, pretty early in the night too. I was letting the dogs out. It was just starting to get dusk, and it was low in the sky, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Mhm.
And I can
Gold.
remember exactly how it looks
Mhm.
right now. And I
Uh-huh.
don't remember the beers I had with my friends at the brewery 4 weeks ago. Um, and so you've got these moments where you can start to appreciate, you find these same ways to get pleasure in the real world, but the process of recalibrating, if you've gotten off kilter, is going to be painful. And then
Yeah.
I think finding ways to cope with that and that meaning, like you've said, and doing things that are more purposeful is such a
Mhm.
fantastic way to think about it.
Yeah. And relationships. Any relationship
Yeah.
is really unpredictable.
Yeah.
I'm unpredictable, my husband's unpredictable. And the thing is it's real in that it's not all shooting stars.
Yeah.
But when the shooting stars happen, right, there's nothing better than that.
Yes.
So, Yeah, I think kind of working for that is something I didn't know at all. I thought I was going to have this life of sort of like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with no drugs? But yeah, it's so much richer, so much more interesting, so much more exciting, really.
Yeah.
I know it doesn't sound like it, but yeah, I mistook, I think, adrenaline for joy.
Mm. It's easy. So many of us do.
Hmm.
Well, Judy, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been a pleasure. I want to, just before we go, for anyone out there, check out Never Enough if you're interested in this topic. Judy does a wonderful job writing this. She also narrates the Audible version herself. So if you've enjoyed her voice during the conversation, she does a wonderful job there. And Judy, if people are interested in getting in touch with you or want to learn more, what are the best places to find you?
So you can write to me at Bucknell, which
Mhm.
is you can find me on the website, but at Bucknell University in Central Pennsylvania, and you'll see my name. The I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok, even though I was just dissing them with my True Weed project. So if people want to read more about the science of cannabis, especially, or collaborate by becoming a volunteer, they can find us on social media or on a website, trueweed.org, where you can fill out a little volunteer form and I'll be in touch. But I would love to hear from anybody who has questions or wants to collaborate. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I'll make sure to link all of that in the show notes. Um, Judy, thank you again. This was a pleasure. And everybody, until next time, this is Next Door Neuro. Have a wonderful day.